So there's a lot of people who seem to think that to be charismatic means to be high energy, high volume, to enjoy being the center of attention. You know, all the traits that we tend to associate with extroverted people. So if you're like me, if you're an introvert in a world that seems to reward extroverted behavior, it's easy to feel like you're always just going to be that background guy. You know, that person who just stands in the background while all the extroverts talk over him. But after studying one of the most charismatic introverts that I could find, I've realized there are still plenty of ways we can be highly charismatic and command the same respect that extroverts get without being the loudest in the room or having to change our personalities in some big way. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the specific traits this introvert possesses that make them just socially magnetic and how you can start implementing them for yourself. So the introvert I'm going to be talking about in this video is Keanu Reeves. Now, Keanu Reeves is, for me, a fascinating case study into how someone who is on the shy side or the introverted side can actually come across as more attractive, more socially alluring by embracing that side of their personality. You know, not trying to be anyone who they aren't, but actually leaning more into the introvertedness. Because he honestly seems like such a contradiction. He's clearly one of the most famous people in the world and does a job which requires him to be in the spotlight all the time. But on a level, he seems disinterested in being famous. Like, if you watch his interviews, he seems pretty uncomfortable, like he doesn't really like being in front of the camera. And he'll go through these spells where he just like disappears for 2 years from Hollywood. And then you'll just randomly see him appear on the bus, like sitting next to some grandma or something. Like, you know, he hasn't got one of these fake Hollywood manufactured personalities. He's not trying to be anyone but himself. And people actually find him more attractive, more relatable because of that, because of his introverted tendencies. So I'm going to explain how Keanu pulls this off and how you can do the same thing. But first of all, we have to understand that there are two charisma types for us to choose from. You have additive charisma and you have subtractive charisma. So most people seem to think that being charismatic is all about adding things in. Saying more words, being louder, telling more jokes. That is what we would describe as additive charisma. You know, you're adding things in. Now, we tend to associate additive charisma with people who are more extroverted, bigger personalities, more energetic people, you know, those like larger than life characters. And that type of charisma can be very good for group settings or breaking the ice with people who you don't know, because people do tend to look to the person generating the most confident energy right away. But where its shortcomings lie are the fact that it can come across as attention seeking, or, you know, like you're trying to dominate the space, like you think you're very important. That can be kind of annoying to other people. And what it reminds me of is theatre kids or just actors in general they're kind of annoying without realizing. Like the person that comes to mind is Rachel Zegler. Maybe you've heard of her. But everyone was hating on her for months and months. She was public enemy number one on the internet because she was kind of annoying in these interviews. She came across a little bit arrogant. And I felt bad for her because I don't believe she's a bad person. I think she's just young and she's come from a world where she's been taught to take up as much space as possible, where she's rewarded for like big expression and being unfiltered. Like, those are traits that would allow you to succeed in the acting world. You know, actors and people in the entertainment industry do tend to have those big personalities, and, you know, they actually get media training to come across as more humble and relatable because they just don't seem like the average person. And subtractive charisma, which Keanu embodies so well, is kind of the opposite. It's a more quiet, mysterious kind of charisma. It's a lot better for one-on-one settings, and it's less about adding things in, you know, saying more or being louder, and more about what you choose to leave out on purpose. So Keanu Reeves, because he is such a private person, because he doesn't like all the attention, he deliberately shows the world less of himself. He'll pop up every once in a while and tell the world just enough about himself to pique their interest. But then he goes back into hiding. He leaves them wanting more, wanting to learn more about him. And an ultra charismatic secret that not many people are even aware of is that when we don't have the full story, when we don't have all of the information at our disposal, our mind is left with nothing else to do but fill in the blanks. We make guesses. We tend to assume stuff. We tend to assume depth and meaning even when there might not be any there. Some really common archetypes of subtractive charisma might be the silent, brooding character in the films, like the Clint Eastwood cowboy, who doesn't say much, but we kind of just assume based on his demeanor that he has some tragic past that he's not telling us about. Or maybe it's the wise old man who has advice for everything. We kind of just assume that he's seen some shit, that he's had like a lot of life experiences. We don't know that for sure, but those are all assumptions we naturally make. Our brains are hardwired so that when they give us less, we assume more. So now you know how subtractive charisma works. I'm going to give you 3 examples of how Keanu uses it to come across as intriguing and mysterious. So the first thing he does, or rather doesn't do, is Keanu never overshares. Keanu is not the kind of person who's going to tell you every detail about his life or exactly what he's feeling or what's on his mind. And that is how it should be. Because if we were to do that, it would be destroying all the intrigue. We want to keep people guessing. The idea is instead of giving people your life story in one sitting, we want to be selective with what information we choose to reveal. We want to let them unravel the mystery slowly. So here's a few things we can focus on. First of all, you want to have very clear boundaries about what we do and don't tell people. We don't want to be telling every person we come across about what our goals are or personal stuff like our finances or family drama. That is not information that just everybody gets to know about. That is something people should have to earn. Like, you only tell that stuff to your best friends. So preserve that depth. Don't go telling everyone your business. And the second thing we can do is to use partial details. So when responding to questions or telling stories, instead of giving all of the information away and kind of killing off any possibility of the conversation going further than that, we kind of just want to give enough information away to build that intrigue or to imply some kind of depth for them to inquire further about. So for instance, if someone were to ask me, how has your day been? Instead of just saying, it was good, like a really boring answer, I could say something like, it's better now. The morning was interesting. That implies something else. Like there's a story behind it that's going to keep people wanting more. And I tend to use that exact thing when I'm texting girls to just keep that like fun, flirty back and forth going. So the second thing Keanu does so well is not being afraid of silences. So many people, when they get asked a question, they just say the first thing that comes to mind within seconds. They rush out all their words. They don't even think about what they're saying. They might say the complete opposite of what they were actually trying to say, or say it in about 20 times as many words. And the reason they do that is because they're scared of silence. Like, I don't know, they perceive it as awkward, so they can't handle any period of silence whatsoever. And this is actually quite low status behavior, because think about it. Would we rather be that nervous, anxious guy having verbal diarrhea, just trying to get his words out at any cost to avoid having an awkward silence? Or would we rather be that relaxed, quiet, confident guy who pauses for a moment to think about what he's going to say and then delivers an answer which is much more profound and intentional? You can look this up right now. There's literally clips of Keanu Reeves where an interviewer asks him a question in seconds. Like, he'll just look at the ground whilst he's thinking of his answer. And the answer he gives will just be so much more thoughtful and worthwhile than if he just like rushed out all of his words. And also the fact that he paused just made his words hit so much harder, like they were delivered with so much more impact. So don't be afraid of silence. We want to be taking at least 5 seconds to process the question before we give a more thoughtful and intentional answer. And the third and final thing that Keanu does so well, and please listen up because this is the most important part of all, is he shows just the right amount of warmth to people. So what we've got to understand about subtractive charisma is that whilst it is successful in building that intrigue and keeping the mystery going, sometimes if you take it too far, people can perceive it as coldness, like you're kind of disinterested in them, or even that you're trying too hard to be mysterious. Now, the way Keanu gets around this is he pairs it with warmth. Now, warmth is known to be one of the three most charismatic behaviors, along with presence and power. And what warmth is basically, in simple terms, is how much we care about the other person we're having a conversation with. Now, that might sound kind of cheesy, but what we've got to remember is, particularly where Keanu comes from in Hollywood, there's a lot of people who have this like veneer of niceness and warmth. Like someone like Ellen comes to mind. For years, everyone thought she was a nice person, but she just turned out to be a complete cunt behind closed doors. Whereas Keanu is known for his private acts of generosity and kindness, like the things that he'll do whether or not the cameras are rolling. Like that's just the kind of person he is. And I think what Keanu understands so well is that whilst we don't have to be best friends with everyone, whilst we can still maintain our private lives, at the very least, we've got to treat people how they would like to be treated. And I know it sounds kind of cheesy again, but these are the things that will really go a long way to making you be seen as that charismatic person. When we're speaking to people, don't be looking off in another direction or on your phone for half of it. Be present, give them your full undivided attention. Listen carefully to what they're saying. Don't talk over them. Give them the time of day. If you're in a group conversation and you can see someone on the fringes and no one's really talking to them, they look kind of left out, do your best to bring them into the fold. Include them, make them feel like a real person, and try your very best when it comes to remembering things like people's names or small details about them. Because 6 months down the line, if you can remember something that they told you, like some small detail, they'll be super impressed and it will honestly go a very, very long way. Again, just look for the small things, things that you can do which really aren't even that much effort on your part, but really do make the other person feel valued. So that is the video, my friend. Those are the 3 charismatic traits of Keanu Reeves. Hope this has been helpful. I will see you in the next one.